Lately, you guys have been asking me to do a tutorial on this painting. I'm kind of obsessed with these moons right now, but I've been doing this kind of landscape for a while. So I'll show you how I go through the process of doing something like this. So to go through materials, I am going to use an Arches watercolor paper that is 600 grams. It's the heaviest that they have. It's very, very hard and has a lot of texture. And I also am going to use indigo, and I am going to also use this orange color. I am going to do a wash, and then I'm going to do the mountains and then the moon. I also have my clean water, and I'm going to start doing the wash now. So I'm just using clean water, and I'm going to just wet the paper with the water. This paper absorbs a lot of water, but it also takes a while for the water to get into the paper, so you really have to work it in. But I really like the results of this very heavy paper. So if you have been looking at my channel, you can see that I do a lot of washes, and I'm mostly doing them the same way every time. So now this is some indigo. I'm gonna try to recreate the same composition as the one that I just showed you. So we'll do indigo up here on the top. I'm just gonna let it travel a little bit. Okay. So now I'm going to use this color. Is actually called cadmium red orange, and I'm going to use it from Holbein, and I'm going to use very little of it so I can create some almost like a sunset. You have to be careful when mixing these two colors, because if they mix too much, they get really, really muddy. So, because I already like the color of my blue, I see that I have a lot of paint pulled up in this corner, and I don't want it to mix with the orange. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pick it up with either a tissue or a dry brush. Well, I have a dry brush handy, so I'm just gonna pick it up. Maybe a more absorbent dry brush. And I just keep moving my paper around. So I get a nice bleed of the orange with the blue. See, this is creating this pool right here that I don't like. So I pick it up. If you notice, this is turning a little bit brown. So I'm just gonna let it turn brown a little bit, but I have to keep an eye on it. I don't want it to become too brown. Alright, so for these spots that are turning a little bit brown, I just pick up the paint, and this one's a little bit too much blue right here, so I just pick up some paint with a dry brush. Very carefully, and that's it. So now I'm just gonna let it dry, air dry, so that's gonna take a while. So I'm just gonna go grab some tea and then we'll be right back. Okay, so now that the paper has completely dried, we are going to add the mountains. And for that, I'm going to use a Chinese calligraphy brush that I bought like a million years ago in some flea market. But it has a rough tip, so it helps with like the mountain shapes. So what we're gonna do is start with the background ones and just start at the corner, very lightly make like a random shape and kind of drag it out, and then just with the water wash the brush and then kind of go through and like around the edge of the shape that you just created and kind of just continue it until it just kind of disappears. Sometimes it looks too straight, so I like to rough it up a little bit. Then I dry my brush a little bit and kind of just diffuse the color. It looks a little bit too light, so I'm just gonna add a little bit more paint, more pigment, and gonna clean my brush, wipe it with a towel so it's kind of dry, and then I'm going to just smooth out. I want it to be like in the background, so it has to be very, very, very light. So I'm just kind of diffusing it. And just letting it be in the background. Just, it's, you have to just, it's a fine line between the background. It has to be very light, almost like transparent. So sometimes I add too much pigment and I just lift it up with the same brush. And just that. So now I can tilt the paper and see where I have a wet surface, and then I can go right under it and paint my next mountain. So with a little bit more pigment, I do the exact same process. Now, going back to my reference. So from the reference, I started from the other side with like a darker color, and then I started increasing in pigment intensity. So that's exactly what I'm gonna do. I just literally, I just have my little plate of indigo, and I just keep drawing the mountains, changing the opacity of the pigment. I'm realizing that the mountain is a little bit too dark to be a third layer. So I'm just adding more water to make it lighter, and then picking up the water which contains the pigment as well. So that makes it a little bit lighter. So that I can keep increasing the pigment as I continue to add layers, and it doesn't become too dark. Ugh. So I'm going to have to let this layer dry a little bit more, because my wet surface went all the way down, and I want to add mountains a little bit more like in this range, so they are like closer together. But this is right now too wet for me to do it. I can't use the same technique I did here, so I just have to wait and wait for it to dry. So this is a very long process, but it looks really cute at the end, so stick with it and it'll come out like really cute. Now I wanted to show you a closer angle, and I'm going to paint a little bit darker mountains, but I'm going to put them a little bit closer together to the top one. So again, I have to sit here and let this dry until I use the next layer of mountains. But it's looking great so far. Okay, so now that this layer is dry, I'm going to add a dark layer of mountains, and I'm gonna stay really close to the top one as well, and it's the same type of system where I just like wiggle the brush around. So now that I'm done with this, I'm going to add the moon. So I'm going to stay with the indigo color, and I'm going to need a little bit of space here because I need to rotate my paper. So I just need to make sure that I can rotate my paper on like a central axis. So I just want to make sure that I have enough space to rotate, which I do. So I'm gonna add my moon right here. So for that, I'm gonna use a very tiny brush, and no particular brand, it's just a synthetic brush, and I am going to like basically add the moon. I'm gonna use my finger as the pivot point, and I'm just gonna lightly hold the brush, and I'm just gonna go around, and I'm just gonna rotate the paper, just kind of like that. I'm just kind of testing to see if this is a good place. Seems like a good place, so I'm gonna go ahead and do it. It's a little bit nerve-wracking because I have a feeling it could totally like ruin the painting, but I don't know, I just have to go for it. So I loaded my brush with indigo, and I'm just gonna attempt to do a small circle. I lost my center. That's okay. I can pick it back up right here. All of these I think are mistakes, but that's what makes the moon kind of fun. They're just kind of like mistakes that I just keep piling upon each other. Strangers looking moon, but that's okay. And I'm just going to add now some splashes of paint, which is just literally loading the brush, like a brush that holds water, and just loading it and like splashing onto the paper. It's super easy. And that's kind of it. Then you sort of just grab then a small brush and add more splatter. And I think I'm done.